Turning points change the course of our lives, whether it's a big decision, overcoming an obstacle or tragedy, or taking a leap of faith. These stories of inspiration and resilience are what Turning Point is all about. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Turning Point. I'm your host, Priya, and this week we have Parween Mander as our guest. Parween is a professional money coach with a unique perspective and offering. She works with first-generation millennial Asian women on improving their finances through a trauma-informed lens. Parween's turning point came when she was a teenager and her parents almost lost their home. It is actually what sparked her desire to become financially independent. Thank you so much for joining us, Parween.
Thanks so much for having me here, Priya. I'm very, very excited to chat today.
Yeah, you have such a unique offering and a story I think a lot of people can relate to. I actually think we can start with your turning point because it has had such a huge impact on your life. And you say it was when your family almost lost their home. You were 16 at the time. So tell us what happened.
Yeah, for sure. So when I was 16 years old, a family member whose name was on the property wanted to get out of the mortgage and the lease. And so that meant my parents were solely responsible. And given their income level, the banks were just very hesitant to give them, a mortgage and sort of refinance the mortgage. And so at the time, it was very scary. My parents were hopping bank to bank. I was going with them as the eldest daughter because obviously English was a barrier for them. Right. And so I was sort of the translator. And so I was very overly exposed to adult financial matters at a very young age. And being the one to tell my parents, like, hey, they're saying no, like we have to go somewhere else was just a very deeply traumatizing experience for myself. So at the time, we almost lost our home. Luckily, we were able to find a bank that was able to work with my parents and their income levels. And so we were able to keep it. But a ton of lessons came to me from that whole experience.
I can't imagine going through that as a 16-year-old. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's any adult who's gone through something similar would say it's been challenging. But here you are at 16 years old, and not only is it stressful for you, but you're kind of carrying the weight of your family at this point. So as you navigated that, you mentioned, you said a lot of learnings came from that. Can you tell me about some of the things that kind of still stick with you to this day?
Yeah, for sure. So for me, it was sort of this turning point around with money itself, right? So the lesson was if you don't have money, that meant you lack security, protection, stability, and power, right? So that must mean that if you have money, you have all those things. Right. And so, I think that was the main lesson, and also not to be financially dependent on anyone else. Right. So for my parents, there was that family member, they wanted to, get out of the mortgage, and again, great for them. But again, I think it's that powerful lesson of you can only really look after yourself and trust yourself when it comes to your own finances.
You also mentioned being the oldest sibling. It comes with huge responsibility, especially in South Asian families. Yes. I'm also the oldest.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So yeah. So I definitely, I feel you on that. So what did you try to do to help out in this situation?
Yeah. So in addition to, I guess, being responsible for translating, kind of going with them to appointments and stuff like that, I wanted to create a family budget. So I sat down and I took like my parents' income and like some of the expenses that I knew they had, and I bore it all out. And at the time I was actually seeing my high school counselor. And so I went into her office and she was aware of the situation. And I told her, hey, look, like I created this budget. Like I just gotta get my parents to get in line with this and we should be okay. And the counselor turned to me and said, whoa, Parween, slow down. This is not your responsibility. She's like, this is not your responsibility. Your parents aren't going to listen to you. Like basically telling me that this is, not within my realm, to handle. And I think at that time, my counselor was, a white woman. And so I think understanding the collectivist culture was difficult for her because, coming from a South Asian background, Indian community, it's sort of again, the family over the individual. And I am responsible for these things, right? Especially as the oldest. So, those are some of the main things that I tried to, assist with during that time period.
That must have been really disheartening to put all of that effort into creating this budget and to go to someone who I'm sure you trusted, your counselor, and to have that reaction.
Yeah, it was. I think in the moment, I still remember feeling like deflated, like this, just like this, like my shoulders dropped and I just felt very defeated. So I was like, well, what else could I do? Right. And I think for me, especially being the oldest, it was always about the sense of having control, right? Looking after others. And so this was me trying to take control and someone saying, hey, this is actually isn't the right path for you. So it was, yeah, a very, disheartening situation.
Yeah. And I mean, how did you deal with that side of it at the time? Because I know sometimes when we're in situations where you kind of go into survival mode almost, and I'm sure you were really focused on, just getting the mortgage situation sorted out. But what kind of impact did it have on you emotionally and mentally?
Oh man, emotionally and mentally, I felt like I was always on edge. Right. I couldn't relax. I couldn't just focus on school. A lot of my peers and friends, like they were like going to the mall and like doing all these like normal teenager things. And I felt like I couldn't do those things. For me, it was sort of, definitely that survival mode, and wanting to be there for my parents. But it was like this deep sense of fear, I think. And that fear kind of dictated, my behavior. And I just felt very stuck and like I couldn't do anything, at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think when, especially as a child, as a teenager, so much of your stability is rooted in your family and in your family home. So that would be really destabilizing.
Absolutely. And again, just coming from an immigrant household, my grandparents lived here too. And so there are multi-generations and there was just a lot of conversations, a lot of arguing. And again, I'm just being exposed to that. It was a very, very tough situation to be in.
So I know I mentioned at the beginning that you are a professional coach now. You help others with their finances. So this turning point really had an impact on how you saw money. And how did that, tell me more about kind of your own experience with money after this.
For sure. And so I became very frugal. That was my traumatic reaction to that experience because I had anxiety partying with my money, right? This idea that money meant control and power and security, that must mean I have to hoard it all in my bank account. So I have that security sitting there for me. And so into my, late teenage years, into my early 20s, that's how I behaved with it. And I was miserable because I deprived myself so much. It was sort of like that, those diets, right? When you like go on a strict diet, you eventually want to break it. That would happen to me. I would deprive myself of spending. Then I would overspend on just random stuff because I felt so deprived, would feel guilty for it. And then I'm back in the cycle, right? Of depriving myself, etc. And I think it wasn't until later, into my mid 20s that I really stopped to pause and reflect on my relationship with money. I was just miserable. I was like, I'm working, I'm making more money than I ever have, but I don't feel any better for it. Why is that? Right. And so for me, it was really overcoming that. I guess it was scarcity mindset. Again, stemming from my experience growing up.
So at this point, personal finance really isn't something that is taught in most schools. I think some are kind of starting to adopt it into their curriculum, but I don't remember learning anything about it when I was in school. So how did you kind of educate yourself on personal finance and start to find a healthy balance for yourself?
Yeah, for sure. In high school, it was all about sort of reading blog posts and like watching YouTube videos for me. And so, and it's actually funny. It's actually this show that was on a Canadian TV show on Slice TV. It was called Till Death Do Us Part. I don't know if you remember it at all. Yes. So yeah, the host, Gail, Val Oxlade, I think is her name. I was obsessed with her whole show. I was like, oh, here she is as a money coach going into people's home and like teaching them about finance and like giving such a transformation, like literally changing people's lives. And so I just became hooked on the idea of like, oh, I want to help other people with their money. And so I sort of, began that journey really early on in terms of teaching myself personal finance.
That's so fascinating. And it's funny how, sometimes people see a lot of those shows as like, oh, this is just entertainment, but really like you actually can learn a lot.
Yes.
From some of those, situations and blog posts, YouTube. these are all resources a lot of us have at our fingertips, but I don't think we always realize how useful they can be.
No, and I think that's the idea, because I think personal finance is such an overwhelming space and topic that you're just like, where do I even begin? And so, I mean, it's been about 11 years now for myself on this journey, and I'm still constantly learning, but you have to start somewhere. So maybe it is a book that you pick up. Maybe it is one podcast that you're just going to listen to, the whole time, or finding a YouTube channel. I think really picking one sort of educational stream and sticking to that as a place to start makes it less overwhelming.
Yeah, I like that strategy, because you're right, it can be overwhelming. And for someone who maybe doesn't have a background in finance, or maybe also grew up in a family where it wasn't something that was talked about, it can be really intimidating. I think really easy to say like, oh, I don't know anything about that. And also I'm not going to do anything about it.
Absolutely. And again, it's this idea of sort of the avoidance as well, right? A lot of people avoid their finances. Why is that? Right. And so again, for someone like myself, that experience that I had, I could have easily gone the other way, where I was avoiding my money, right? I was overspending it because I didn't have access to it, growing up. And so these intricate narratives when it comes to our finance is something that I'm much more interested in exploring, in the work that I do, because I can teach someone how to budget, right? And pay off debt, but actually helping someone behaviorally change their, the way they manage their finances takes a lot more time.
Yes, I can only imagine. And let's talk more about that, because you mentioned there you have your own business, The Wealthy Wolf. Yeah. Tell us more about how, well, first of all, what you do and kind of how it's connected back to your turning point too.
For sure. So, I'm a money coach, and I am certified as an accredited financial counselor and a trauma money facilitator. So I really help my clients, transform relationship with money. So whether that's, helping them get out of debt, build savings, start investing, sort of those core foundational aspects of managing their finances. Overspending is another one as well. And for me, it was always this idea that when I was sort of in this phase, when I was 16, trying to learn about personal finance, there were no money mentors that looked like me, right? I didn't feel comfortable walking into a bank and talking to the old dude behind the counter and asking my questions. That was a very intimidating, experience for me. And so just realizing that there was no South Asian woman in this space, I wanted to become that mentor for other people. And I think my background as well as being, from an immigrant family, and bringing in that sort of collectivist culture and those nuances that, yes, when it comes to personal finance, doesn't mean it's always personal when, you're a part of a collectivist culture, right? Sometimes you have to lend money to family, right? Sometimes your money doesn't feel like it's yourself. It's for yourself. And so being able to explore those topics in a non-judgmental space that I do with my client, I think is very, very important. And so having that relatability factor was huge for me.
That would make a huge difference for someone to be able to talk openly and to speak about their family situation, and for you to be able to understand from your own experience. I wonder, for any of our listeners who might not be familiar with a collectivist culture, can you kind of explain a little bit more what that means?
Yeah, for sure. So coming from a collectivist culture, it's really this idea that you put the community, so that could be your immediate family, friends, peers, above yourself. Right. And so, of course, there can be a toxic element to that when you're always looking out for others and not yourself. But coming from collectivist culture like the South Asian community, like I do, that played a huge role for me. And so, especially when it came to personal finance, this idea that I was going to look after my parents in retirement, that's sort of a non-negotiable, because they looked after us. And so in our community, it's like we look after our elders as well. And when it comes to the mainstream personal finance community, that isn't talked about. We're talking about your own retirement, right? How to open up your own retirement savings, right? Not necessarily how to balance your own plus your parents, right? Or plus another family member. And so I think that's just the gap that I've addressed, or I'm trying to address within the space.
In a competitive labor market, postgraduate studies can really help to set you apart. And Fanshawe College offers more than 50 programs to do just that in under 1 year. There are full-time and part-time options available, and many of the programs are even offered online. You'll leave with specialized skills from their career-focused curriculum, and many programs even offer credit toward industry designations. You don't have to wait until September either. There are January start dates for some of these postgraduate programs. To find out more, visit fanshawc.ca/postgrad. Again, that's fanshawc.ca/postgrad. You could also click on the link in the show notes. And it definitely needs a completely different approach to money management because, as you just highlighted there are so many other things that you're thinking about. It's not just yourself and your own retirement. You're thinking about your family as well. So is that kind of your own experience part of what led to you focusing your business on Asian millennial women?
Absolutely. Because again, there's no money mentors that look like me. And I wanted to be that safe space for someone to come to and learn about finance. Again, money is a sort of a hush-hush topic. It definitely was for me kind of growing up. And I think also within the South Asian culture, it's this idea of what will other people think really drives a lot of people's behaviors. And it's no different when it comes to money. Right? Like the big fat Indian wedding, like the gifts and this and that. Even if your family was struggling financially, they will never show it. Right? It was always outwardly you expressed that you were okay. Well, that's going to impact you when you become an adult and you have your own finances and you're trying to manage through that as well. And so, again, I think these nuances are just very, very important to carve out space for.
Yeah, I mean, and you highlighted, the collectivist culture, the message about appearances really being really important in a lot of Asian cultures, and kind of like you said, just not wanting, even if you are struggling, not wanting anyone on the outside to know. What else would you say are some of the unique challenges that your clients are facing?
For sure. One of them is definitely, it's a money disorder. And a money disorder is basically behaviors that aren't necessarily conducive to a healthy financial relationship, right? So those are things like hoarding, frugality, overspending, financial infidelity, which means lying about your finances. And one that comes up a lot with my clients is financial enabling. And financially enabling essentially means when you self-sabotage your own finances in order to make sure other people are okay. So when your family asks for money, when your friends ask for money, even though you may not be in a space to give that, you still do it, right? Because for you, you only feel safe when other people around you are safe. And that might mean giving away your money. And that comes up a lot with the clients that I work with because growing up, it's this idea of like to be a good daughter, a good mother, right? Just the idea of being good means to be of service to others and constantly giving to others over yourself. And so really finding ways to set those boundaries when it comes to their finances is really, really challenging. And I think that's just a really unique perspective because again, that's ingrained in us kind of growing up of like, for you to be a good person, you need to be, constantly abiding by and obeying others.
These are, a lot of this is really resonating from me. We have similar cultural backgrounds. And so I think that a lot of this messaging is so prevalent, especially when we're thinking about Asian culture. So I think it's really great that you're offering this advice to people from a unique perspective. I wonder, you mentioned that you also have a certification in, was it trauma advised financial?
The trauma of money. Yeah, the trauma of money program. I am a facilitator of that.
Yeah, so tell me more about that because I really didn't make this connection between trauma and the way we handle money until we started talking.
Yeah, for sure. And to be honest, for myself, I also didn't make the connection either until, again, I got to my mid-20s and I was like, what is this relationship with my money like and where is this coming from? And it wasn't really until I enrolled in this program. And the reason why I enrolled in the program was, again, I still noticed a gap in the sort of money coaching, personal finance space, which is, again, I can provide the education, right? I can teach people how to get out of their debt and build savings. But why aren't people implementing the advice, right? And that's what I wanted to address. And it definitely came down to, again, emotions, behaviors, and past narratives when it comes to money and trauma. So that's why I enrolled to become a trauma money facilitator, which gave me the tools to address sort of, again, those intricate layers of someone's relationship with money. And so I do that through a couple different things. One is sort of reflection work through some journaling prompts. The next is sort of a money disorder assessment tool, and a money scripts assessment tool. And so with these three things, we start to really understand that relationship. And in addition to that, and I think this is what's really unique about this program that I enrolled in, it's really understanding your nervous system as it relates to money. And when we think about money, we think about just cold, cash, transactional. We're not necessarily thinking about emotions and how our nervous system may impact that. So again, there's a lot more to finances than I think a lot of people think. And so I'm really proud of the work that I do.
I mean, I'm feeling very like I'm having light bulbs going off all over the place here, because I think that, I mean, for me, and I'm sure for a lot of people listening here and watching, like, I think of money as something like finances as its own little box. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't think about it being connected to emotions, or I wouldn't think about journaling about finances in this way. But as you're saying this, I'm starting to connect the dots in my own life as well. So do you get a lot of that kind of reaction when you start working with clients?
Oh, absolutely. It's sort of like, again, like the light bulb, like, oh, this is where that was coming from. Oh, this is why I've been, behaving this way. Or like, oh yeah, how my mom used to, manage her money. I'm definitely doing the same thing. I didn't even notice it. And that's the key, right? It's when we interlock those areas and then we bring in that self-awareness, we can then pause, in the present day to be like, okay, before I make this money decision, where am I, right? What's influencing this? How am I feeling right now? Etc. And so I think that's a deeper layer, right? That's how we actually move into the implementation of a financial plan, and not just, here's the education. Try to implement it yourself.
Yeah. I mean, anyone can find a budget plan online, but
yes,
yeah, you're right. I mean, if you're not addressing some of those root issues, then it makes it a lot harder to make changes. I think it's like regular therapy or counseling,
Yes.
you can, I mean, you can read all of the affirmations or anything you want, but until you kind of start addressing those root causes, it's really hard to make progress.
Absolutely.
Huh. Well, I never thought about it that way. So thank you for that perspective.
No worries.
I think one of the hardest pieces of personal financing or getting a financial advisor is just taking that first step and admitting that you need help. Yeah. So what do you think is the main reason people don't do that?
I think it's shame. I think it's shame that holds a lot of people back. This shame of, I'm not where I'm supposed to be financially in comparison to my peers or other family members. It's shame that, oh my God, I have all this debt. I don't even know where it came from. I feel so ashamed of it. I think it's shame, right? And shame keeps us stuck in inaction, right? This idea of like, okay, I'll just avoid it. It's not there, right? I'll just kind of keep going through life, kind of avoiding it. And I think also that vulnerability of asking for help with such a private area of your life, which is money, right? Money is one of those topics where no one's really talking about it online. Yes, people post their nice dinners and new bags, but no one's posting the receipts for it, right? That's just not the culture. That's not the culture. And so I understand again, like where the hesitancy comes from. Yeah.
What advice would you give to someone who is thinking about asking for help, finding a money coach or a financial advisor?
For sure. Do your research. Interview a few different people. Don't just go with the first one that you meet. Don't go with just your neighborhood bank, right? Try to find someone who you vibe with, honestly, and who you feel comfortable around sort of asking questions. So that might be someone that's more like a younger millennial, someone close to your age. Maybe it's someone of the same ethnic background. Wherever that you feel there's more commonality and more vulnerability for you to sort of have those conversations. And definitely credentials is another big thing, making sure that they are certified in some way to assist you. But also really going into it knowing where you're looking for guidance, right? Are you just looking for help with your investments? In which case, a financial planner and financial advisor is great. Are you looking for help with budgeting? In which case, a money coach would probably be more helpful in that, because a financial planner, that's not within their scope of responsibilities. So I think really addressing like where you're looking for support.
I think money is top of mind for a lot of people given the pandemic. For some people, it was a time of of abundance and saving a lot. And then for other people on the opposite end, it was a time of when they lost their jobs and had no money. So what have you experienced, with your clients during this time? And are there any trends that you've seen that are connected to the pandemic?
For sure. When it comes to my clients, I've seen both ways. They started investing during that time period, or the flip side where they lost their job and, they were taking government assistance, for that time period and, leveraging line of credits or credit card debt and now coming to me to sort of get themselves out of that hole. The common thing that I see across all this is I think this idea of you always looking out for future you, right? And I think that's very difficult for some people when it comes to, their finances, because this idea of like satisfying the you now, right? Spending money now. And it's very difficult to think about, future you is also going to need support. Future you, is going to need those savings. And I think one thing I always tell my clients across the board, and they always resonate with this statement is, what can we do to make you debt resilient? Right? How can we keep you out of that cycle of leveraging a credit card or debt to sort of, live your lifestyle? Right. And so for the people, again, that were, lost their jobs and people that were, thriving during that period, it's this idea of like, how do we keep you debt resilient? And that means, having a financial foundation. That means having savings in an emergency fund. And for those who don't know what an emergency fund is, it's usually having, anywhere between 3 to 6 months of living expenses set aside in a savings account in the event that something were to happen to your ability to earn income. It's like the least sexiest thing anyone wants to do with their money or like save up for. They're like, well, why would I do that? I can like go travel and do all these things. I understand that, right? I understand that. But we're trying to protect future you. We're trying to protect you in the event that these unforeseen, we just went through a global pandemic of all things. Things happen. How can we make sure that your future you is going to be okay?
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, anyone who had those savings, I'm sure, was really grateful when this all happened because we were all propelled into this time of uncertainty. Yes.
And I think for them, it was more so a gift of an opportunity, right? To be like, oh, wow, like this, unlike someone else, like, I've been able to save more, I've been able to invest more, and they may not have been able to do that prior to the pandemic, right? They may have been living paycheck to paycheck, but with the pandemic, they were able to save more. And so now it's sort of this opportunity of, well, how do you balance that, right? How do you balance still living your life, going out to dinners and the movies, while still keeping up, these positive financial habits that you've built up?
I guess like most things, it is something that's in flux and something you're adjusting to, right? As different life events happen.
Absolutely. And I always say this to my clients as well, which is like, let's identify like the season of life that you're in right now. Maybe you're just coming out of school and you have student loan debt to pay off, right? And like now you're paying rent for the first time. Okay, that's what we're going to focus on for you, right? Maybe you're in this phase of saving up for your emergency fund and like saving up for like travel and all these things. Cool. This is what we're going to focus on for you. Or maybe you're in a phase of, hey, I have a down payment and wedding like coming up soon. Okay, that's sort of your focus right now. I think when it comes to personal finance, like it also gets overwhelming when you just don't know how many things you're supposed to be focusing on. Like there's retirement and there's debt repayment and there's like saving for an emergency fund. You're like, whoa, like where do I even begin? Where do I put my energy in? Right? And the answer to that is it depends. It depends on who you are, where your situation is. And that's where getting guidance and support and one-on-one attention can be really helpful.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. I mean, I think sometimes we try to do everything ourselves, and it just makes such a big difference to have that resource, to have that person with experience. So yeah, this is all really resonating. I kind of wonder now, it's been 11 years since your turning point, since your family almost lost their home. We've talked about all of these learnings that you've had since then and really where you are today. What would you say you're most proud of as you kind of reflect back on everything that's happened since then?
Oh, such a good question. See, my perfectionist mindset's usually like, I'm not really proud of anything. I'm always on a journey to improve myself, but I'm just going to like put that to the side.
I feel the perfectionist mindset.
You know what? I think for me, it's this idea of really honoring myself first. What I mean by that is that I'm always going to be there for my family financially and otherwise. But I think really over these past few years, especially since my mid-20s hit till now, it's really been about focusing on myself, and my goals, and kind of the direction that I want to head in. So, I am proud of the fact that I do have sort of the financial knowledge and like the education to support myself on that. But I also think, this idea of setting boundaries, and looking after myself first, as difficult as it is, and again, doesn't mean I'm completely cut off or anything. But I think that's what I'd be most proud of.
Yeah, I mean, those are all things that I'm sure when you look back at how you were feeling when you were 16 and all of the challenges and stress and trauma around that situation, I mean, it's really amazing that now you've been able to kind of work through that and now use your experience to help other people.
Absolutely. And so, I think that's why, yeah, like another aspect that I'm proud of too is I could have easily gone into traditional corporate banking. I could have easily gone down the route of becoming a financial advisor and pushing, investment products on people, but not necessarily actually helping them with their day-to-day finances. And really being brave and courageous and starting my own business. And I think as a South Asian woman, again, we're not really taught to become CEOs, right? We're not really nurtured in that aspect. I'm definitely proud of the journey thus far, on this entrepreneurial journey. I'll put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're thrilled that you shared your story with us today. I look forward to following along on your journey, and maybe the two of us somewhere along the way will become slightly less perfectionists and start recognizing our success, not always thinking we need to do better, but I feel that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me again, Priya. This is an amazing conversation.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it too. Thank you so much, Parween. And thank you to all of you for watching and listening. You can subscribe, of course, to our YouTube channel. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you thought of today's episode. If you're listening, give us a follow on your favorite podcast app. And if you have a turning point you'd like to share, we love hearing from you. You can always email us at turningpoint@priyasam.com. Until next time, take good care of yourself and of each other.